Right, so Israel using banned munitions might not be breaking news for some people these days, following the developments and actions of Israel over the last year, certainly. Chemical weapons used such as white phosphorus in civilian areas on one hand, that has been seen on multiple occasions in Gaza and more recently in Lebanon as well. So also have been strikes using depleted uranium-cased warheads, which I covered in another video the other day, known to cause birth defects and cancers from their use during both the Iraq and Gulf Wars by the US. And given that only the US and UK have weaponized forms of this kind of uranium ordnance, it begs the question of where exactly did Israel get that? But now it seems yet another banned form of munition has been used by Israel against Lebanon. At least this is the claim currently being put out by Hezbollah. But if true, not only is this a seriously unhinged government that would use such a weapon in civilian areas, as has been the claim as well, but given the widespread ban of this particular ordnance, the question once more is how did Israel get it? Right, so it seems no weapon is off the table for Israel, even if they are banned, and there is actually only one country we can realistically look at for the supply of them again. But before we get too far ahead of ourselves, what is the weapon in question, Damo? You might well be asking yourself. And it is cluster bomb munitions that Hezbollah are claiming Israel are using against them. Cluster bombs essentially being a missile which contains many smaller bomblets within it, so that when the cluster bomb itself lands, the bomblets are thrown across a wide and indiscriminate area to then detonate. Due to the indiscriminate nature of that dispersal, they have been banned by many countries on the basis that the civilian casualty rate from their use is far too high to excuse, and often, too often, many of these bomblets don't explode on impact at all, and therefore pose a threat to anyone happening across them later on. These are therefore banned under the Convention on Cluster Munitions, and those states, parties and signatory countries, 124 of them, refuse to use them point blank. The commitment these nations have signed up to reading, "The Convention on Cluster Munitions, CCM, was born out of a collective determination to address the humanitarian consequences and unacceptable harm to civilians caused by cluster munitions. States parties are committed to the full universalization of the Convention and to promote its norms, as well as to fully implement it. Its implementation contributes to advancing the achievement of the UN Sustainable Development Goals and the promotion of international peace and security, human rights, and international humanitarian law." 124 signed-up nations reject the use of these munitions. Amongst them are Lebanon, Iraq, and the State of Palestine. But it also includes us here in the UK. It notably does not, however, include Israel or the United States. Would the United States send these things to Israel then? Well, of course they would. And we know that because they've already given them to Ukraine. Ukraine more than happy to use these things, apparently, indiscriminate in the harm they do as they are. And it is notable that as much as we are backing Ukraine to the hilt in the UK, we would not sign off on handing cluster bombs to Ukraine, cluster munitions, in a rare example of divergent foreign military policy from the US. An excerpt from Al Jazeera on this matter from July of last year reads, "Several countries have announced they will not send Ukraine cluster munitions following the United States' decision to send the controversial weapons to the front line. On Friday, Washington confirmed it would supply Kiev with the widely condemned bombs as part of a new $800 million security package. US President Joe Biden defended his decision as difficult but necessary, saying Ukraine needed them and has assured Washington that the bombs would not be used to target territory in Russia. More than 100 countries, including the United Kingdom, Germany and Canada, have signed an accord under the Convention on Cluster Munitions to ban the production, stockpiling, use and transfer of cluster bombs." So yes, the US are happy to sell them to other nations, and though we don't know for sure this is absolutely where Israel got them, it seems very, very likely. There's another reason for that too, which I'll come on to. But whether their intended use was to hit Lebanon, I have my doubts. Whether it was Lebanon or Gaza, it doesn't really matter though, with both states being signatories to the CCM, yet they are being used on their people. Absolutely abhorrent, but it's what we've become accustomed to with Israel, isn't it? The only nation involved in warfare in the Middle East, not sticking to military targets like everyone else involved seems to have been, but indiscriminately targeting civilian sites, such as, for example, the grounds of the Al-Aqsa hospital in central Gaza, as they hit last night. The scenes of fire and people caught up in that, patients being treated as they were, deliberately targeted. People seeking refuge in the grounds, deliberately targeted. It is as amoral a move as you could ever dream of. It is just pure evil. Therefore, to use cluster munitions in Lebanon against innocent people, civilian targets, well, of course we can believe Israel would do such a thing, even if the word of Hezbollah is currently all we have to go on as far as that goes. Surely their word counts for more than Israel's given their conduct. Even if you disagree with that notion, it's still got to be investigated properly. The accusation has been made, right? So what have Hezbollah actually said then? Press TV covered this, saying, Hezbollah says Israel poured missiles loaded with cluster bombs over neighborhoods in southern Lebanon. Cluster munitions are globally prohibited because they cause both immediate and long-term civilian harm. Hezbollah said in a Sunday statement that the regime's military bombed the localities of Hanin and Tiri in the southern Lebanese district of Bint Jbeil with missiles loaded with cluster bombs. We are not surprised at all by the new barbaric crime, which is added to Israel's record of crimes against the Lebanese and Palestinian peoples. This is not the first time Israel has used banned munitions against the people of Lebanon. The regime used artillery-fired cluster munitions in populated areas of the country during its 33-day war in Lebanon in 2006, according to Human Rights Watch. Well, if you don't want to take Hezbollah's word for it, Israel has form according to Human Rights Watch, so it's still believable and still warrants investigation. Let's hope UNIFIL or someone are able to do so, as they also happen to continue to come under fire by Israeli forces themselves, as the genocidal madman in charge of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, demands UNIFIL leave the area for their own safety, yet they stand their ground anyway, doing the job they're charged with, armed with US weaponry that the US has given them against a UN body that no US soldiers take part in, as UNIFIL is, but the remit for whom is signed off on each year by the UN Security Council, on which the US does sit as a permanent member. The US really do need to be put in a position of having to pick between Israel and the UN, but that's perhaps a matter for discussion in another video. What does bear coming back to, though, is that where Israel used cluster munitions in southern Lebanon on Sunday overnight, the attack on the Al-Aqsa hospital, coming back to that, and the patients and refugees lying defenceless in the path of that oncoming assault in tents, were also apparently victims of cluster bomb munitions. Now, there is using cluster bombs on areas that might cause civilian damage, which for 124 nations is enough to ban these disgusting creations completely, and there is deliberately striking a hospital grounds with them, as is now being claimed as well, when they were full of refugees. So did the US send these then? Because now it appears to be a more important question to answer than ever before. And the answer is still probably yes. In fact, we know they've sent them to Israel previously. They certainly sent some to Israel shortly after the night of October 7th, as an excerpt from iNews from last October that I've dug up has shown. The Biden administration has sent at least 2 shipments of weapons to Israel since the attack by Hamas militants on Saturday 7th of October. The shipments included interceptors for Israel's Iron Dome air defense system, which is designed to protect the country against rockets and shells fired from Gaza, as well as cluster munitions known as DPICM, dual-purpose improved conventional munitions, and other large ammunition, a US military official told NBC News. Have the US sent any since? The answer is going to be probably yes again, isn't it? The US have not banned these munitions. They've supplied more weapons to Israel than anyone else. They won't stop even as Israel use such ordnance indiscriminately. But what if the US haven't supplied any more of these? The fact that cluster munitions have now been used in Lebanon and in Israel at Al-Aqsa hospital is notable in my mind, because I can't recall another incident of these munitions, these cluster munitions, thus far being used anywhere else. I could be wrong, but I've certainly not had another story concerning cluster munitions cross my desk. I couldn't find one upon a cursory search when writing this story. It's just a thought that's occurred to me as I was writing this, therefore, and the reason I thought it is because that early delivery or ordnance also included Iron Dome interceptor missiles, which it is being widely discussed at the moment that Israel are either running low on or have run out of, accounting for the success of recent strikes by Hezbollah, amongst others, of drones and missiles getting past the air defense system. Could it be that the big box of fireworks that Israel have been readily getting through is getting a bit bare as well, and Israel have now resorted to using these in deference of anything else they may now have run out of? Food for thought, isn't it? Are these what has been rattling around at the bottom of their military armaments box, so to speak? Not that that excuses anything, of course. These things should not be being used. They should be banned. And again, it's reprehensible that the US have not signed up to doing that. For more on that story, the uranium warheads being dropped on Beirut, though, radioactive ordnance being dropped in a heavily populated civilian area, just one more nail in the coffin of any morals Israel claimed to have. Get the details of that story in this video recommendation here as your suggested next watch, and I'll hopefully catch you on the next feed. Cheers, folks.